Hey everybody. So, last episode I talked about PilotRedSky, a musician and animator whose prolific career on the internet has inspired countless artists over the past 15 years. A good portion of PRS's fans have remarked that his music and visual style created, among other things, strange feelings of nostalgia for something that never really existed. Nostalgia is a funny thing. We can never really be sure what's going to bring it on, or why. For many people around my age, the strangest things invoke a longing for the past. Outdated media formats, cancelled TV programs, abandoned places of all kinds. In the vast and rapidly changing world in which we grew up, the things that remind us most strongly of our beginnings are often things that are no longer needed. The obsolete, the obscure, and the forgotten. And a franchise that has come to represent this more than most others is the defunct video rental chain, Blockbuster, once a multi-billion-dollar global franchise, but now survived by a single location, once one of thousands. The story of Blockbuster Video is an unusual one, weaving in and out of corporate takeovers, shady dealings, and the decline of home media throughout the end of the 20th century. Take a seat, if you will, and listen to my tale. Our story begins, where else, but the 1973 oil crisis. You see, a few years after the turn of the 1970s, due to a number of factors I'm not even going to get into here, a critical shortage of petroleum took hold of the Western world. This led to drastically elevated fuel prices, an economic recession, and a transformation of energy production and storage in the United States. People, as you can expect, were not taking this very well. But for a select few, this crisis presented a unique opportunity. Oil was needed, more so now than in decades, and as such major American oil exporting regions were quick to take advantage. States like Alaska, which had seen the majority of its income sourced from natural resources since the Klondike Gold Rush, and Texas, which had seen a previous oil boom around the turn of the century, were able to profit tremendously off the nation's drastic need for natural gas. And in the state of Texas, a secondary and entirely unexpected effect of this economic crisis was soon to appear. In 1978, a Texas resident named David Cook began a business startup creatively titled Cook Data Services in the interest of supplying computer service and support to the Texas oil industry. Cook was technologically skilled and a gifted idea man. His goal was to profit off the oil boom by helping to streamline the industry with the computer systems that were growing more and more ubiquitous each year. Unfortunately, this would turn out to be a fruitless endeavor. By the time Cook Data Services went public in 1982, the energy crisis was subsiding, and the Texas oil frenzy had largely died down. Cook made a reasonable amount, but prospects were dim, and in 1985 he would sell his assets to begin searching for a new business opportunity. Now, the landscape of the early 1980s was a potentially lucrative one for business startups, particularly in the tech and media departments. It seemed every other day there was some brilliant new startup by young entrepreneurs making millions in a matter of weeks by taking advantage of rapidly advancing technology. Case in point, home video rentals. Companies were slowly coming to terms with the concept that customers might want to watch a movie more than once, and potentially own it for their own purposes, and the Video Home System Standard, or VHS, had just been adopted a few years earlier in 1976. The market was ready, but it hadn't yet seen large-scale industry. All of this was about to change. Cook later recalled it was his wife who advised him to enter the video rental business. Using capital from his sold tech company assets, Cook attempted to buy into a local Dallas video store franchise known as VideoWorks, but was dissatisfied with the lack of control VideoWorks gave him. In October of that year, David Cook decided to strike out on his own. The first Blockbuster video store, named after an industry term for an explosively successful film, opened in Dallas on October 19th of 1985, with a number of very unique features to set it apart from the competition. Video stores at the time were known to be clunky, expensive, and difficult. Clerks had to fetch videotapes upon request. Said tapes could exceed $50 in value, and the buying process could take considerable time. With his background in computer systems, Cook knew he could streamline the process, and he set about designing a system in which tapes were cataloged in a database, displayed openly for customers to take to the counter, and then scanned with a then advanced barcode system, and rented out to customers for a period of a few days, all of which was kept track of in the database. Of course, it also helped that Cook had an inventory of around 10,000 tapes, both VHS and Betamax, far more than any of the competition. And what resulted from this was a resounding success. The first night we were so mobbed we had to lock the doors to prevent more people from coming in, Cook would later recall, remarking on how Blockbuster's remarkably efficient system made the process of renting a movie something any customer could easily do. This early success led Cook to open a $6 million warehouse in Texas and open a number of franchise stores throughout the state. But Cook's status was still uncertain. He had never viewed himself as a businessman, and what public opinion there was of him tended to be neutral or negative, after a 1986 financial article pegged him as an outsider with little knowledge of the video industry. Change would have to take place if Blockbuster were to survive, and it would come in the form of a man named Wayne Huizenga. Huizenga was already a well-known businessman, the founder and owner of Waste Management Incorporated, a monolithic waste company that had come to almost single-handedly control the majority of garbage collection services in the United States through an aggressive series of buyouts across the country. Chances are, if you live in the US and you've seen a garbage truck, you've seen a waste management vehicle. Huizenga had initially been apprehensive about entering the video industry, but after seeing Blockbuster's success, he was convinced to buy a large portion of Blockbuster with several waste management associates in 1987. Unfortunately, this would spell the end of Cook's involvement. Due to some disagreements and Cook's general unwillingness to see the Blockbuster project through in the long term, Cook sold his share in the company and left with around $20 million in his pocket. And with his departure came a whole new era for the company. Huizenga kept a number of Cook's successful policies and methods, like his late hours and 3-day rentals, but began to heavily push the limits of Blockbuster's expansion across the country. Using similar techniques to those they developed at Waste Management, and loosely following McDonald's franchisor Ray Kroc's model of expansion, Huizenga and Associates initiated a campaign of rapid and aggressive buyouts of numerous other video stores. Southern Video Partnership, Movies to Go, Video Library, and Major Video Incorporated were all acquired in the first year alone. Expansion became so explosive during this time that there existed a period in which a new Blockbuster was opening every 24 hours across the country, and this only seemed to accelerate. By the late 1980s, Blockbuster had become #1 in America, if only because there were no others strong enough to compete that hadn't been bought out. Now, with the US market in a stranglehold, Blockbuster turned its attention overseas. Blockbuster-owned locations under the Ritz name were opened in the UK by the end of 1990, along with a series of stores in Japan. The company rounded off the year by purchasing yet another rival, Errol's, for upwards of $40 million. But this growth began to slow in the 1990s. Rapid technological advancement brought with it new ways to watch TV and movies, and Blockbuster wasn't exactly quick to adapt, foreshadowing a critical flaw that would come to plague the company in years to come. Poor customer turnouts in 1991 were waved away by Huizenga, who claimed the Gulf War had been keeping customers' interests focused on current events rather than video rentals. But even in this uncertain time, the company continued to expand. More and more international stores were opened with each passing day, and the company attempted some diversification, selling video games in a number of locations. By 1993, the company owned over 3,000 locations in 10 countries, and had just finalized deals to buy 2 music retailers, as well as the entire video catalogs of Republic Pictures and Spelling Entertainment. The company was selling videos, games, music, anything they could do to offset their decaying profits from video rentals. Unfortunately, this wasn't particularly effective, and the company began to encounter major trouble as the new millennium approached. In September of 1993, feeling threatened by video on demand and satellite TV, Huizenga began efforts to merge with media conglomerate Viacom, and while the merger did eventually go through, it was plagued by difficulty and saw both companies' stocks tumble in 1994. As the 90s ticked on, Huizenga finally surrendered his leadership position in the company, and Blockbuster continued to try anything they could to stay afloat. A number of unsuccessful CEOs with equally unsuccessful plans of action came and went. Blockbuster attempted to sell merchandise and PC repairs. The company was downsized, then moved. They briefly tested an arcade/entertainment megaplex concept called Blockbuster Block Party in a number of cities, and while this is honestly a video topic in and of itself, it'll suffice to say the project was a failure. Things were looking grim for Blockbuster by 1996, and it seemed to many that the company would be just another relic of the 80s and 90s, outmoded by a changing world. But as you can probably guess, this wasn't quite the end. June 1997 saw the company take on former Taco Bell president and CEO John Antioco, under whom Blockbuster began a series of reforms to drag the company back from the gates of hell and into the limelight again. Antioco streamlined the company's business model, stripping away all the random stuff that had been implemented over the last 5 years and focusing almost entirely on video rentals. Revenue sharing agreements were signed with film studios, and international expansion began again in full force. Although the video store concept was on its way out as 2000 rolled around, Blockbuster seemed once again somehow to be on its way in. In an uncharacteristically wise move, Antioco had store inventory focus on DVDs, which were rapidly replacing VHS as the preferred physical format, and made a number of other modernizing efforts in order to allow Blockbuster to compete with mail order and video on demand services that were rapidly taking advantage of a new-ish technology called the internet. Amidst the chaos of the dot-com bubble, Blockbuster turned down an offer to buy a small mail-order video startup called Netflix for $50 million, with Antioco reportedly dismissing the offer under the pretense that the dot-com hysteria was completely overblown. Blockbuster would, of course, come to regret this in years to come, but this isn't the time for fortune-telling. In 2003, the company introduced subscription plans and online ordering programs to its customers, and soon after in 2004, Blockbuster would hit its all-time peak, with almost 10,000 stores worldwide, making billions each year. But just as it was in the 90s, this success would begin to slip before company execs even had time to celebrate. The trouble began in 2005 with the company's ill-explained no late fees program, which in actuality just charged customers full price if they didn't return a video within 30 days. This led to lawsuits in a staggering 48 states, plus DC, and was a PR disaster for Blockbuster. Sensing that Antioco's decisions were growing ineffective, infamous corporate raider Carl Icahn, responsible for the hostile takeover of Trans World Airlines, began engaging in a campaign to get himself on the company's board and Antioco out of the company entirely. With its public image damaged and inner conflicts worsening, Blockbuster's days seemed once again to be numbered. An ill-advised 2007 internet promotion called Total Access lost the company hundreds of millions on the wager that it would draw in new business, and Antioco was finally ousted from his position, replaced by former 7-Eleven CEO James Keyes. I swear, the Venn diagram of different companies' CEOs is just like a circle. In 2008, the Great Recession forced the closure of hundreds of Blockbuster locations all across the country, and in the aftermath the number of stores rapidly dwindled. This coincided with the meteoric rise of internet video streaming sites, which were somewhat poetically spearheaded by Netflix. And on September 23rd of 2010, Blockbuster officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy after several years of decay. In April of 2011, Dish Network bought the company in an effort to revive it, as Blockbuster's final CEO Mike Kelly took office the following month, but very little came of it. Throughout the 2010s, Blockbusters continued to close, and by the middle of the decade its assets were being liquidated at a catastrophic pace. By 2018, only a handful of stores existed in the world, the last remnants of a dying species. Most of them, weirdly, were in Alaska, a place where the 1973 oil crisis had had somewhat different effects. But by 2021, even these would close, alongside the last overseas store in Australia, leaving behind one single location, the last existing Blockbuster in Bend, Oregon. The store pays a small licensing fee to Dish Network, still technically the owner of the now defunct company, but gets no actual assistance, merchandise, or promotional materials, and has to make everything essentially on their own. This single store is all that remains of a once international, multi-billion-dollar company that revolutionized the video industry and left a lasting impression on several generations, including my own. Now, weirdly enough, this final Blockbuster is actually remarkably successful. It attracts a steady stream of visitors and customers, not just from the Oregon area, but all around the country and the world. Blockbuster merchandise, which was a resounding failure in the 1990s, proved to ironically be quite successful at this location as well. Despite technically being a relic of an industry that doesn't really exist anymore, this final location stands strong as a reminder of something that once was. You can still visit it today and pick up a movie to take home just like it's 2005, or 1995, or 1985 again. And I personally hope it stays this way for as long as possible. Thanks for watching.